Boy, we're small in numbers this morning. Where is everybody? Vacationing, I guess. Enjoying the lake or whatever, I don't know. Anyway, Thursday and Friday and through the weekend, there's a couple of families that are hosting some people from that we all grew up together in Medford, Oregon, Southern Oregon. And Dave and Becky, they're actually hosting Jim and Ellen Gregg, and Pastor Darold and Barbara Bigger, and we're hosting Chuck and Phyllis Brainerd. We spent a little time together. We went to the rodeo Thursday night, and we had a little round of golf yesterday, a few of the guys, and had some time together, dinner and so forth. So anyway, our speaker today is Darold Bigger. Darold and I grew up. I think I've known Darold since I was probably, 10 or 11 years old. In fact, my parents and Darold's parents, I think, went to school together, Columbia Academy, way back. So we go way back in this family as far as that is concerned. I want to tell you a little bit about Darold. And when I look at this, I think my little bachelor's degree, it's pretty small. So Darold has a PhD, Master of Divinity, an MSW. I guess that's Masters of Social Work. Is that correct? All right. Darold graduated in a degree in theology, social work, and counseling. He was a licensed marriage and family therapist and a certified clinical social worker. Darold spent 26 years pastoring in Idaho, Oregon, California, and Washington before becoming a professor of religion and professor of social work and assistant to the president of Walla Walla University. Now retired from teaching, Darold continues to serve as assistant to the president of Walla Walla University. And that's not all. He was a Navy Reserve Component chaplain for nearly 30 years. Retiring as a Rear Admiral, assigned as Deputy Chief of Navy Chaplains for Reserve Matters. During his 5 years in that assignment, he directed the religious programs for more than 100,000 Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard Reserve Component for service members. For his work, he was assigned, For in his work in that assignment, he received the Distinguished Service Medal, the Navy's highest non-combatant award. Since Navy retirement in 2004, he continues to support service members and families, including active involvement in the Returning Warrior Workshop program. Some of his hobbies, he loves to snow ski, boat, and he works with horses. And I know he has several horses at his place up in College Place, Washington, where Darold and Barbara live in that area. He and Barbara raised 2 daughters, are foster parents of a 3rd, and grandparents to 5 certified, adorable grandchildren. We love our grandchildren. So, I want to present to you Pastor Darold Bigger. I ask the blessing on him as he opens up the Word of God today. May we all be blessed in the name of our Messiah, Jesus Christ.
You are famous at our house. Even though he would claim to be retired, Rudy is still a salesman. And one of the things he has sold us on is this congregation. He and Jenny love you all. And because of that, we think highly of you as well. We Academy classmates have had a good time the last several days, enjoying time with one another. And this morning you have already welcomed us into your circle. And we are grateful for that. We've been looking forward to coming for a long time, having been asked to address a specific subject, and not knowing that in your Sabbath school lessons this morning, you would have been delving into that very subject. So in the context of what you have devoted some discussion time to already, I remind you again of that vibrant, energizing hope of the Seventh-day Adventist coming. That's what that word means, right? The second coming hope of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. You heard scripture being read from that well-known passage, the chapter in Matthew 24, when Jesus is prodded to address the disciples' questions about how the end will come, when it will happen, and how we'll know when it's time to get ready. I'm intrigued with several verses in that passage, starting with verse 36. But about the day and the hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage up to the day that Noah entered in the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That's how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. You know, it's kind of a scary thought, isn't it? That God is out to trick us, to surprise us so soundly that we will not have any idea what in the world's going on. So we spent some time, at least in the Sabbath school class we were in this morning, talking about some of those signs and what kind of indications does it give. If you've been watching the news, you have seen news about Mount Kilauea in Hawaii, right? As of yesterday, the news story I read suggested that 325 acres had by then been covered with new lava in this most recent eruption. And that 40 structures, many of them people's homes, had already been destroyed. How would you like to see that marching down the street of your neighborhood? A little scary, huh? You've also heard in the news about the protests on the Gaza Strip at the border between Israel and Gaza, and how as a result of those protests, scores of people lost their lives. The world is in a mess. Several months ago, we had a series of hurricanes. High water destroyed people's homes. They could not live where they used to live. Rescued as much of their belongings, those things that were important to them, as they could. And still, there was devastation. Hurricane Irma came through the Caribbean, followed later by Maria. I just spent much of a week in Puerto Rico at some meetings late last month, early this month. And there are still 20,000 people on that island living without power. One of the chaplains I was visiting there, an Adventist Army chaplain, said that her parents on the island of Puerto Rico had lost everything they owned. Nothing left. We hear about other difficulties in the Middle East as well. A stream of refugees leaving Syria during the last year. Thousands and tens of thousands of them risking their lives, crossing the water to safety in boats, many of whom capsized and overturned. And then we hear about South Sudan as well. Terrifying statistics from that country. 1 million children suffering from severe malnutrition, and 5 million people. Can you wrap your mind around that figure? That's as many as the total population in the states of Idaho, Nevada, and Montana. 5 million people in that country need urgent help. You deal with some of those kinds of concerns in your own community by helping sustain those who don't have the basic sustenance they need to live. So in that context, the disciples confront Jesus. I'm quoting here in this text from Luke 21, that parallel passage to Matthew 24. Luke 21, where Luke records the disciples asking Jesus, when will these things happen, and what will be the sign that they are about to take place? Then Jesus said to them, nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines, pestilences in various places, and fearful events, and great signs from heaven. Do we see those things? Absolutely, we see them. Is this the first time human beings have experienced those kinds of challenges and traumas? No, it is not. Some in our Sabbath school discussion this morning pointed out that this is a repeated, ongoing, repetitive reality for those of us who live on the earth. So how is it that these signs are supposed to affect us then? If you notice the description of how Matthew records Jesus' words, connecting him with the preparation for Noah and the ark, that in the days leading up to the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, right up to the very day. Well, what's so strange about those activities? We do those all the time, don't we? And that suggests to me that perhaps the greatest sign that the end is approaching is that there is no sign at all, that everything continues as it has been, that our lives go on without any flashing red lights that stop us in our tracks and force us to shift our attention into something much more profoundly important. In our personal family lives, a couple of pivotal events have reminded us of the importance of always being ready. Years ago, Barbara and I had our older daughter murdered, killed in her apartment near Washington, D.C., in her mid-20s, reminding us that to ignore the reality of the soon coming of Jesus would be at the peril of our own selves. Did she know that Sunday afternoon when she came home from a military band concert in Washington, D.C., that there would not be another morning? Absolutely not. How do you and I know that we're going to make it home safely after church today? Oh, the point is we have to be ready at every moment, right? So the signs are continuous, so our preparation is continuous and unrelenting. In our house right now, I have my youngest sister living with us, diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, with no treatment toward remission possible for her. She visits often with us about what it's like to anticipate that this will be the last year of her life, and how that has shifted her lifelong Seventh-day Adventist Christian orientation to a different kind of relationship with God, that it sobers us. So the signs remind us of how important it is. One of those early shocks to us came on 9/11. A few of you have either gray hair enough or the lack of hair enough to remember that day. I was in Washington, D.C., working at the Navy Chief of Chaplain's office that morning. After the first airplane hit the tower in New York City, we were called down to the Chief of Chaplain's office and watched on television live as the second plane crashed into the second tower. We knew then that this was not a mistake, not some horrific accident, pilot error, but that this was an intentional act that was going to change our lives forever. I visited the chaplains and emergency workers in New York 10 days after that attack. And even then, the heap of rubble was still 10 stories high. Life as we knew it changed forever. That day, I was in my office at the Navy Annex. We heard a plane scream over our building, followed by a loud thud, followed by fire alarms that evacuated us into the parking lot. I spent the next 36 hours on the site of the Pentagon, waiting for the fire to die down, helping people who were being evacuated get to hospitals, many of them carried in helicopters. Life is uncertain, and we have multiple reminders of that reality. What is our response to those kinds of events? That's what I'd like to focus our attention on a bit. How do we react to these kinds of horrific trauma in our lives? While we from the chaplain's office were evacuated into the parking lot near the Pentagon, an office worker came rushing out, saw us in our chaplain corps uniforms, and came literally yelling over in our direction, "Is this the end of the world? Is this the end of the world?" She was in absolute panic. And panic would be an understandable response, wouldn't it? The continual anxiety and fear of how all of this is going to end. Every sign throwing us into an elevated level of stress and anxiety, terrified that something horrific is going to happen. Another reaction to these kinds of signs is to sort of project the Aesop fable story about yelling "wolf, wolf" when there is no wolf. If we warn ourselves about something so frequently that never takes place, we come to discount the warning. We ignore the signs. We pretend like life will never change, like everything will go on forever. I had a friend who I heard preach a sermon about our reactions to living in the contemporary world. He talked about it from his Midwestern setting, where tornado warnings were frequently sounded, loud sirens warning people to head for shelter. So what do you do when the tornado warning sounds, he said? Do you panic, or do you stop and polish the silverware as if nothing important is going to take place? I would suggest to us today that we do a combination of those things, and it intrigues me that Jesus, in his reply to these questions from the disciples, would say what he would say. When you hear of wars and revolutions, do not be frightened. Don't be frightened. How can you live in a world full of terror and not be afraid? How is it that we can find that sense of optimism at a time of pessimistic projections about the future? How do we change our attitude to conform to this invitation of Jesus, who, after listing all of the ways in which the world would be turned upside down, Jesus says, don't be afraid. This picture intrigues me. What do you see there? You see a man carrying a woman who is carrying a child. The rescuing of being rescued of the one being rescued. And I'm particularly intrigued, can you see well enough how this baby is reacting to this trauma? Sound asleep. Isn't that precious? How could we, as believers in God, relate to the terror in the world in such a peaceful way that we would not be at all afraid? I was also interested in this photograph of Syrian children who had been evacuated from their homes, crossed into a safe country, but in a refugee camp. Family lives turned upside down. And what do they do with their time? They play games together. How can we, who know about the end of the world, invest ourselves in the day-to-day activities here and create a kind of positive buzz around us, if you will? Serve other people so clearly and so willingly that we bring a sense of peace and comfort to those who are in turmoil. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we as individuals and as a community of Christians could be those kinds of people, settled, content, knowing the end is not far away, not knowing for us whether it would be today or tomorrow, next week, next month, but being peaceful and not frightened about that, and still willing to invest ourselves in bettering the world. This man was one of 16 that I interviewed in a research project a couple of years ago. Former prisoners of war during the Vietnam War. He was incarcerated for a comparatively short period of time, but had a horrendous time getting to the prison in Hanoi. He was an Army helicopter pilot. His helicopter was shot down in Laos, actually, and he was marched for weeks along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, force marched, while the Allies were bombing the trail, life continually in danger, and he retained a level of optimism that shocked me so much. I wanted you to hear it in his own words.
Yeah, that's interesting. Usually people tell me all the time I smile all the time. I'm not sure where that comes from. But that does remind me of one thing. Being an optimist, I tend to associate with optimistic people. And that is one thing that still bothers me to this day. I mean, you talk about a glass half full, glass half empty. The glass half empty people, I don't have a lot of time for now. It bothers me to see people pessimistic because, as we've discussed, we've just talked about all these bad things that are going to happen. So, I mean, we have a choice, and maybe that is a conscious choice, maybe it's an unconscious choice. But we can look at the bad things that surround us and grab a hold of those. And I think one reason I reject that so much is because a lot of the guys I saw die in captivity were people who just clung to the negative. Oh, this is horrible, it's awful. The other American that was with me that died, he was a very negative person. I was a very positive, optimistic person. I'd crack jokes when we were walking up the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I mean, both of us near death. And he'd just scowl at me, and I'd sit there with some silly giggle. But yeah, negativity, from my experience, can have devastating, even fatal results. And so I reject negativity, and I reject negative people. Not that I'm particularly rude or anything, I just don't find myself attracted to spend time with people who have a negative outlook. there's good things in life, and there's negative things in life. And if you want to ponder and spend time with the negative, then you can be all depressed. But while that's going on, there's plenty of wonder and joy and beauty all around you. So why not take the positive view? Yeah. Once I got to Hanoi, I was filled with joy when I got there. They threw me in a solitary confinement cell the first day there. They washed me out. I hadn't shaved for 5 months. I don't go all of my problems, but I had dysentery and I was a mess. So they bathed me, they put me in the maroon and gray striped prison uniform and threw me in a solitary confinement cell with a board on the floor I was laying on, and they brought me in a bowl of bean sprouts with a little crummy piece of French bread that was all stale and had pieces of rock and stick and stuff in it, and probably fairly horrible overall. But after what I'd been through, I sat there in that solitary confinement cell clean, knew I didn't have to walk another step on the trail up to North Vietnam, and tears just rolled down my cheeks. I knew I was going to survive, that the real struggle was behind me, and now I just had to gut it out in Hanoi for however much time was left in the war.
Yeah. What do you think? Over and over I heard from those POWs that they always believed they were going to go home. They felt sorry for the North Vietnamese who were imprisoning them because they would have to stay there after the war was over. Finding optimism in the middle of difficulty, looking for the good things and underscoring those, and letting go of the negativity. Absolutely key to our Christian survival in a desperate, dangerous age. I want to remind you of some texts in Revelation. You remember that John, in the book of Revelation, starts describing what was happening to him in vision. And it reminds me of a cousin of mine, a cousin who delighted in teasing us younger cousins. He was the one who would hide out in the bushes, who would try to terrify us in the middle of the night. One time I was visiting their home, which at that time was in northwestern Montana. They lived at the edge of fairly deep woods, and my youngest cousin and I went out for a walk in the woods, not knowing that older cousin Rex had stationed himself out behind the trees. I was given a little tour through these pine trees and shown a big, deep pit, which my younger cousin, my companion, carefully described to me as a bear trap, because there were bear out here in the woods, and we better be careful. Seconds after that, we heard crashing and groaning, and we took off to the house, hard as we could run. I made it over the fence, through the field, crossed the yard, into the door, and turned around, and there was nobody there but two cousins way back at the edge of the woods, laughing and laughing and laughing at me. I was scared to death. I have a hunch that the Apostle John, when he got this vision, had feelings very similar to that. Have you noticed the verses earlier? In verse 10, on the Lord's day I was in the Spirit, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. I think that voice would have said, "Hey!" And John jumped and turned around, and what did he see? This terrifying being with long white hair and a sword coming out of his mouth and flashing things all over. It was a frightening, ghostly appearance. And this vision of this terrifying being speaks to the Apostle John, gives him a message, and then says that John fell at his feet as if he were dead. He passed out. He was so frightened. And then this vision of God placed his right hand on me and said, "Do not be afraid. Don't be afraid." How might it be for you and me as we anticipate the end of human history? When we think about the time of trouble and the challenges that lay ahead of us, how do we anticipate those days? What attitude comes on us? Are we panicked, terrified, frightened of what's coming? Or are we peaceful and optimistic? Not ignoring the signs, paying close attention, but choosing to see the beautiful things around us. Engaging ourselves to enhance and help other people. Preparing ourselves and those we love the most for the good news of God's second coming, not the terrifying things that might frighten us along the way. So, how do we respond to these signs of Jesus' soon return? In panic? No, God himself says, "Don't be afraid." Do we ignore them? Not that either. We want to always be ready for that wonderful and delightful gift from Jesus of an eternal life with him.